Greetings, friends of the original Shepherd's Rod message, and welcome today to our presentation where we'll address the question about upa7.org. Where does it come from? What's our history? The rise and progress of this important movement. And over the years, we've received a lot of questions about who we are, where we come from, how do we operate. And so at this time, we'd like to address those issues, and we'll arrange it through an interview. So we have one of our faithful Bible workers in South Africa, Brother Mikhail, who will lead forward with this interview. So please stay tuned.
Greetings, dearly beloved, in the wonderful name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. We welcome you this evening to our interview, where we will be interviewing Brother Eric, the co-founder of upa7, and who is the publishing director. My name is Brother Mikhail, and I am a worker in the Lord's Vineyard here in South Africa, part of upa7. And today we have an interesting interview where we will understand and go through the history of how upa7 got started. So this will be very exciting. So please join us. Welcome. Greetings, Brother Eric.
Greetings, Brother Mikhail. Thank you for the invitation to talk today about this.
Yes. Yeah, this is truly an exciting interview where we get to understand how did all of this wonderful work begin, and where is this work going. So my first question, Brother Eric, is how did upa7 begin?
Okay, that's a really key question. Why did we start? And I always like to introduce that. We arose out of necessity because of a great need that we saw in the work that wasn't being met. And it really starts in the Philippines. My wife and I had traveled there in 2003 for the first time, and my wife was originally from the Philippines, and her labors as a Seventh-day Adventist. She was a conference-trained Bible worker, but she sent a lot of money and spent a lot of effort to the Philippines to bring in many of her family members, and she actually funded the building of an entire church, a whole church in the town where she grew up in. And so she had a lot of invested interest in family and relatives and people as Seventh-day Adventists. So of course, after we got married and in the Shepherd's Rod is the desire to share this message with those people that she had this. She helped fund or support Bible workers out of her own money. So that was the motivation to take the Shepherd's Rod message back to this part of the Philippines. And so we traveled there, and starting in 2003 as self-supporting missionaries. At the time, we were supporting members of Mount Dale, but we were not supported by their tithe. We financed this with our own money. And the only thing Mount Dale provided us for was a box of literature that we carried with us in our luggage. So we, over a period of the next 2 years, traveled back and forth 3 times, all financed on our own, and introduced the Rod message there. And there was a lot of interest and excitement. But after over time, we established a small group there. There were really 3 principal families that got convicted and converted, and a Bible worker that was in a local church got converted. And so this brother and myself worked together. We traveled around the Philippines. And one of the greatest needs we saw was for literature. And the literature that we had, of course, that brought over from Mount Dale was quickly exhausted. And it wasn't complete. It was just like, maybe a few hundred tracts, and those were dispersed quickly. And I think the time we went back again, we brought some more. But the pressing problem was the dearth or lack of literature. And so that was where I began to entertain the idea, well, maybe we should publish it here because there's such a pressing need. And other people we met when we traveled, I met people that had been exposed to the rod message from the past, way back in the 80s and Ukaipa days. And most people there might have some pieces of the literature, but I didn't meet anybody that had a complete set of rod literature, even though they might have been studying the message onwards for, 20, even 30 years. So this was an obvious problem. And so we began to think about how to solve that problem. I worked with this brother, and part of that effort was I came up with this Meet in Due Season, which is basically became a Bible worker's manual with all the quotes and the outlines for the studies and the charts and everything, a lot of historical information. And so I published that over there. That's how a lot of people, we were able to reproduce it. That's how a lot of people studied into the rod while we were absent, was through this publication of a Bible worker's manual. So we approached Mountaindale with the idea about, shouldn't we set up publishing here? And the answer was rather startling, but the bottom line was the executive council said no. They just, no. And so later, in 2005, I came back to the States. Mountaindale was in turmoil over things that happened the prior year, and there was a big division, and there was a split. And I attended that special session in 2005, and I wanted to talk about that literature problem in the Philippines, but there was so much political turmoil or chaos that I really wasn't able to. I was just trying to sort out what's going on, because there's these both sides and throwing stones at each other. And I was trying to get the facts out, and they were trying to pigeonhole me in one group or another. And I'm like, it was rather complicated. And so I wasn't able to address that issue. So I, meanwhile, went back to Connecticut, and I was working a job at minimum wage or barely surviving. But the following year, 2006, Mountaindale held a session. They split, the group split, and the ones that remained there, I contacted them and said, I'd like to speak with their voted and nominated vice president, their new vice president, about this literature situation, because it was still a persistent problem. And so I ran up, I was basically stonewalled. I made several attempts to meet with that vice president, and I would try to contact him, and they'd say, oh, well, he went off to Barbados for 3 months. Really? So I'd wait 3 months, and then I'd call back, and so I kept being evaded. I couldn't get it. And so finally it came around to the summer where they're holding their session. I said, okay, I know this brother's got to be there. So I finally got a hold of him, and I said, I need to meet you and talk to you about this literature situation. He says, okay. So we set a time, Thursday morning during their session, 8 a.m. So I took 2 days off of work and traveled to 2.5 hours there. And I showed up at Mountaindale at Thursday morning at 8 a.m., got out of the car, met some brethren. Oh, hello, greetings. How's Sister Connie? Oh, she's doing great. She was back in the Philippines at the time. And so finally I saw this brother JJ was his name, and they were all running to get into their vans and go somewhere. And they got in. Oh, hi, hello, how's Sister Connie? Oh, great. And they jumped in the vans and they drove off. I'm like, what? And it turns out they were done with their session. They were all going to the zoo, the Bronx Zoo in New York City. And I'm like, hey, but I didn't even get a chance to say anything, and they were gone. And I'm standing there, and there's a couple people left, and I went and talked to them, but they were just there to watch the property or whatever. And I was perplexed. Like, oh, I went out of my way. And some people were trying to pigeonhole me. Oh, well, you're in that group that left. And I said, no, I attended their meetings, but, based on what I saw there, I'm not involved with whatever they're trying to do. I'm here as who I am, self-supporting Bible worker. And we got the situation in the Philippines. And I talked to one brother about the idea of setting up a publishing house there. And he said, that makes sense. So the idea made sense, but as far as their leadership, they had no interest. And I remembered this distinct impression. I had one piece of business to do in the town to get a copy of marriage certificate because my wife and I were married there at Mountaindale, and I needed a copy. So as I left that property, I paused in the car and I thought, Lord, what's up here? And I never remember getting the strongest impression. Leave them alone. They went to the zoo. Keep going. So I did. I drove off that property and I've never been back since. So I went back to Connecticut and I'm like, okay, what do we do now? And talking with my wife over it, she says, we got to do our own. And I came up with all these arguments. Wow, that's impossible. I don't know this and I don't know that. And my wife is very stiff in a way, in a good way. She says, where's your faith? Get on your knees. We got to do our own. And that was the seed. That was 2005. She came back later that year and I was still working, but that's the genesis, the idea. And so later that year, it was in around the end of the year, around the holiday season, that I got on my knees and prayed. And I said, Lord, because I keep thinking, well, I got to get connected with other people and all of this. And my wife says, no, leave them all alone. Just go about this work. And so when I got on my knees and prayed, the Lord impressed upon me this idea, well, obviously they make books and booklets in a print house. They got to fold them up somehow. So I took a track and unstapled it and pieced it back together from, how did this thing come to be? And then how do they lay out? So, and it turns out that I had the software, the Adobe InDesign professional layout software on my computer that I had purchased as part of an agreement to sell some property down in Salem, South Carolina. And this brother and I, who were talking about the idea of setting up, printing the literature, because Salem, at the time I was a member at Salem, wasn't doing it. They compiled everything. So he, in part of this house deal to buy this thing, he insisted that I have the software. It was $1,000 in software, Adobe CS3, Photoshop, InDesign, Acrobat, so forth. And it turns out that was absolutely the essential tools. And so I didn't know how to use it, but I began to study it. And that's where one thing led to another. And for the next almost year and a half, I quietly worked on that and eventually quit the job and went full time. God provided miracle money to do all of that work, the layout, and make possible this means of not only making literature for ourselves to address the Philippines, but contact with another Davidian sister. I'll give her credit, Dara Dietz and her husband Michael. A lot of people don't know about them, but they were the first Davidians to put the rod message on the internet back in the late 90s. And they were members of Mountaindale. And they said, we got to get the rod message to the internet. And the Mountaindale Executive Council says, oh no, that's government control. They were more worried about black helicopters and whatever conspiracy, New World Order stuff. So they basically poo-pooed it. They weren't interested. So Dara and Michael Dietz said, we feel impressed to do this. So they didn't wait around or ask permission. They pioneered out and put the rod on the internet, including the first photographs from Sister Bonnie Smith. And so as soon as they did that, guess what happened? Everybody came knocking at the door. Hey, knock, knock, knock. Oh, how did you do that? Show us how to do that. The Wacos and everybody else. And Dara was very generous. She said, here, she provided them all of the code and the images. Back then it was HTML. I think there wasn't even CSS back then, but HTML and all the image files. And that's how the other groups cobbled together and put their websites. They didn't even give her credit. But that act of selfless generosity made an impression. And Sister Connie said, we should do the same. And I'm like, and that's where we got the idea, make it available for anybody in the world. And so August 2008, upa7 was launched, and it shook the Davidian world. This concept, this idea, this radical out-of-the-box idea that you can download a print file in the form of a PDF and anybody with a computer, laptop computer, a laser printer, and some simple tools could fold up, staple, and produce their own tracks. So that's how, and since that time, yeah, that day that website was launched, we sent out like 400 emails. Our phone rang off the hook, cell phone and landline, for 2 days straight. Everybody wanted to know, who are you? Where'd this come from? You know. So yeah, this turned things upside down, but that's how we started.
Wow, that's truly amazing, Brother Eric, and thank you for sharing that. Interesting to hear how nobody was interested in getting publishing work around the world. That's very interesting, and we thank the Lord for your wife who encouraged you to do these things and to learn these things, because I know that you are from a academic background, so HTML, Photoshop, graphic design is not what you do.
No,
but the Lord has been working with you to actually learn those skills and to develop those things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I even had to go back to college, so to speak. I went to a community college and took 3 classes on web design. And that's an interesting side story. The class project, at the end, you did these little projects, but you had to have this thing where you actually make a website. Now, this is back, 2007, and this is before they had all of the fancy scripting and all of that. So upa7 was the class project for this class. Okay. And it's old school. And when you go there today, that looks like the dark ages. Well, that's how websites looked in 2005, 6, 7. And it still stays the same. Why haven't we upgraded? Not necessary. It served its function and purpose. We were able to post images and documents and then explain to people, and they could download. And so it served this purpose. But yeah, I had to go back to school and take 3 classes. I took one on Photoshop and Flash design. And so I know by no means an expert, but this is one of the things is if you see a problem, you got to figure it out. You have to learn the tools and the language. And yeah, it takes personal effort. And of course, the books, you have to read and study and, rack your brain. But if there's a will, there's a way. And so this was a need. And so.
You mentioned that it started in 2008, that would make it about 15 years old then, because we're in August now. I'm sure a lot has happened over those 15 years. Maybe you can tell us, Brother Eric, how did the name upa7 come about?
Yeah, that's a point. That's a very specific name because we're considering, well, how do we identify this? Well, a lot of people are curious. UPA is an abbreviation for Universal Publishing Association. Because if you look at what we're doing is we're replicating or republishing the original tract literature that was published by Brother Houteff, and all of that work from its beginning of the Shepherd's Rod in 1930 was the first thing that Brother Houteff started was the publishing work, and he called it Universal Publishing Association. So this is nothing new that we've created. We're just continuing that legacy by replicating the exact originals. And that was one of the big things that came up as we began to do this work and locate the originals and compare them with the stuff that's being published today by the different groups. People noticed, wow, they're different. There's differences. And yeah, this cracked the door open to a whole list of controversies of that we came to this realization that all the literature being published, for the most part, was counterfeit. It was altered. It was not original. There had been original, and that's part of that history of like tracing, how did God preserve the truth after the death of Brother Houteff? And we came out with this 6-part series that we released in 2010 called The History of God's Storehouse from Genesis to Revelation. And I wanted to focus on after the death of Brother Houteff. I was tunnel visioned on tracing the history of the storehouse after Brother Houteff died. But my wife says, oh no, that's so detailed, nobody will get it. You got to go back and start in the beginning in Genesis. And I argued with my wife, and I said, oh, that's too much information, I'll take forever. But I realized over time, and I couldn't convince my wife otherwise, that, maybe there's a point of this. And I said, well, it might serve a purpose, but I'll have to do it and break it into pieces. So I did 6-part history. And I realized that it's actually all in the rod, but to trace this history over time, how God has preserved the truth from the beginning all the way up to our day, then you see these key signposts and these identifying marks and keys, how to identify the true versus the counterfeit. And I'm like, oh boy, this is significant. So we released that in 2010. And so that ability to, produce the original literature was the key. It really it shined light and said, and so that name, Universal Publishing, that's what we did. And then the 7, as we traced this history, okay, Brother Houteff started the original, so we could call it UPA version 1. But what happened after he died? Where did it go? And we were able to identify and trace who derived the original literature. And that was the key to identify the movement of the storehouse back and forth. And it turns out it popped back and forth across the US. So it reorganized back. Now, Florence hijacked and took over the message. And by 1962, she ran the message into the ground. She resigned. No more literature being produced. So the question, where to go? Well, there's a group of faithful Davidians. They called themselves 100% rod only Davidians. And we got this covered in a lot of videos on our YouTube channel. But they reorganized back in 1961. And one of the mandates out of that was to oppose Florence Houteff's apostasy and also the heresies coming from Ben Rudin and the branch. But they had 2 mandates, which is 1, we got to get back and establish and publish original literature. And then 2, train Bible workers. And the interesting thing is that's exactly what our mandate is today. It's no different. So that group existed in Southern California for a while. And then later they moved from Southern California to Salem, South Carolina in 1970. So and Salem kept that literature alive for a period of time. But then there was a split there, disagreement over doctrines and protocols, how to publish. So the group, some of them broke off and reorganized back in Yucaipa, back in California, under the original charter. So, and then Yucaipa later joined with a group that broke from, or was kicked out of Salem in the early 80s, and then they merged in 86 and became Mountaindale. So God has always had a place to preserve the original literature. And Mountaindale did up until about the year 2000. They printed the original literature from printing plates, the old conventional offset printing, but those plates wore out. And so they went over to digital typesetting. That's where things began to change. And by 2005, when they had that split, Mountaindale was no longer publishing original literature. It was all typeset. And they'll say, oh, it's original. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's typeset, digitally typeset. The typography is not the same. The cover artwork's altered. And there's artifacts introduced, and people will challenge us. And I said, well, take track 1 from them and compare it to this original. And tell me how many artifacts you find. Dozens. Okay, so that's another reason, is getting back to the original. But because Mountaindale didn't publish the original anymore, and 2, they didn't have an interest in seeing it published in other parts of the world, God moved to storehouse. And so counting those movements back and forth, 1, 2, 3, Mountaindale was number 6, turns out, out of the counting scheme. This was the 7th movement of the Universal Publishing since its inception in 1930. So that's where the name comes from.
Very interesting. Wow. But Eric, we certainly thank God for how he has used you. As I was just thinking about my own experience a few years ago, maybe it was about 2020, when I started listening to the 6-part series of the Storehouse Moving. Isn't it so interesting that you created that in 2010, but 10 years later, a South African would listen to that, and those efforts from all that time back then would be realized and be fruitful now, because it's truly amazing, isn't it?
And it is that truth is always the truth. It's eternal once it's established. And what we're talking about here is a history that's contemporary or recent history. But I absolutely, when I pieced this together and got all of this evidence, when we were studying how to put this literature together, I traveled a lot and I found archival documents that nobody else had seen or heard of. I mean, I would say, for example, at 2005 at Mount Dale, I had some documents with me and I showed them to a brother. I said, "Hey, have you ever seen this?" "No, that's really interesting." So there was all kinds of stuff. And I spent a lot of time. I did this in a recent video, remembering Sister Bonnie, who passed away recently, but her and I collaborated. It was a wonderful collaboration over years, sharing her content. She was very generous as well, like Dara Dietz. And so we have that same spirit. We share what we found, but I would go into these places that I believe God opened the door, GC Archives and Andrews University. I saw documentation that nobody else has ever seen. And I digitized it and I would share it with people. Sister Bonnie, where'd you get this? Where'd you get this letter from Brother E.T. Wilson pleading with his colleagues? And, little nuggets like this. And I said, "Well, I got it over here. Oh, can I have a copy?" "Sure." And then she would make copies and send them to her little circle of influence. I'm like, "Hey, great. Let it spread as the leaves of autumn." So all of this history, in addition to the original literature, was our story, who we are, where do we come from. And as I studied this, I saw how the Adventist Church documented their history, the pioneers in the books, and how they digitized everything. So guess what? I just watched them. I talked to them and looked at their operation, how they archived and digitized everything. And I'm like, okay, we need to do this for the Shepherd's Run. And since we don't have a general conference and all of this, I decided to do it. But the legacy is interesting because once the story is there, the narrative, there's content there. Honest people have seen it. It's like, wow, every Davidian needs to see this. And I said, exactly. This is who we are. This is a story. So whether I did it 10 years ago or 20, it doesn't matter.
Amen.
And so you come along or anybody comes along, I recommend that. Usually depends on what stage they're studying. The first thing is read the whole message, but you begin to ask those questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? How do we deal with this contemporary situation? All these groups scattered and everybody claiming to be the original. I'm like, well, no, it can't be true. Somebody's got to be right. And you got to deal with all these others. So that evidence is crucial. So it's part of our, I guess you say, education, learning who we are as a people, where we come from.
That's very remarkable, Brother Eric. This leads me into my next question. I always hear from people out there that upa7 is a one-man show, Brother Eric. Please, can you elaborate on that?
One-man operation. Well, yes and no. I know where that comes from. Actually, that's a derogatory remark made by a leader of Waco in an effort to disparage us, because people were beginning to notice, like, who is this? What is this UPA? And then they found out later, it took a while, about 10 years before it started to get established, but people found out about us. And it was once I started doing YouTube videos talking about all this history and corruption and these ideas of multiple publishing houses that people started noticing. And we got contacts from like Africa and islands in the South Pacific, Vanuatu, and they said, this is what we need. We need this here. We're talking about large groups from Mountaindale and so forth. And so that's where they just, start discovering, and that's where that was their pressing need. And so then I realized that this problem of a lack of literature in the Philippines wasn't just the Philippines, but it was a worldwide problem. And so those groups that were kind of control their empires, like Waco, got disturbed, alarmed. It was a threat to their control because they thought we're going to do everything from the U.S. And so they made that those people started asking questions in their sessions. And one time, one leader in Waco stood up. That's just a one-man operation. That's where the term came from. to put it down as like he's a flyby. There's always
Mm.
risen people that have come and gone away. And I'm like, okay. But there's a truth to it. When we started in the beginning, in 2006, I guess you could say it started with one man and his wife. Had to start somewhere, but if God's in this thing, then it's going to, like the mustard seed, it's going to grow and start bearing leaves and then eventually fruit, and it'll become evident that either God's behind this or he's not. So if it's truly a one-man operation, then it'll come and fade away. And there's been fanatics and false teachers, and they'll come and go. But I said, okay, time will tell. Well, there's been enough time since 2008. And so now what they're trying to do is keep people from really investigating and the reports of what they're finding out, that this is far more than one man now. I'll just give an example. The group in Vanuatu, that when I visited there and helped them set up the publishing work, you're talking almost 300. And they broke from Mountaindale, most of them, except for a handful. I didn't tell them to do it. They did it on their own because Mountaindale failed to meet their needs, failed to feed the flock. So we provided them the means to publish their own literature. You're talking 300 brethren. The only one or two had most literature, way back from Ukaipa days, but nobody had a complete set of literature. So I said, that's order number one. Brother Batik, I told him, you take 300 times 75, that's 15,000 pieces of literature. How are you going to do that?
It's a lot.
They've done it. By the grace of God. He's accomplished, took about 2 years. In addition to literature to take to the other islands, Solomon, Fiji, or whatever. So they're in that process, but they got to meet all of that need. And wherever you go, so when I went to Africa just before COVID broke, I thank God, that God got me over there. But Zimbabwe, South Africa, same thing. A group of 30 brethren here, 40. None of them had complete set. They were reading the rod message off of a portable, cell phone device. I'm like, it's like in posting statements on WhatsApp, and I'm like, I couldn't believe my eyes. I said, this is criminal. I said, these people need, the meat due season. Everybody needs their own set of literature. So, that's what I realized, that this neglect was a huge one, and it was a worldwide problem. And so the desire to see this established, everywhere in the world, it became more and more real. I mean, the idea we've had since 2004, but the reality of it is like very much in our presence, now. So the idea that we're a one-man operation is that, well, maybe one man will start publishing work in the UK, or maybe one woman in Australia, but that's not the end of it. As we all know, God is moving. Like I say, you yourself have been to Australia to help a sister who's just on fire, more or less isolated, but not totally alone. If God's with you, you're not alone. So it might start as a one-man operation, but just sit back. If God's in it, the fruit will come in.
It's very interesting that the other associations have not had the foresight to do these things. It seems like they want to control everything from one location. And as COVID has been evident that, when the whole world was shut down, it was impossible to do things, to move physically, to move tracks physically, so those kind of that kind of situation could certainly happen again. What would they do then? So yeah, interesting.
And this brings up another thing, is the logistics of, they want to rule the world from their 7-man unauthorized council, in the US. They don't like that, but that's what they are. But the question is, how are they going to reach 22 million Seventh-day Adventists worldwide? That's a problem that nobody can address. The answer is simple. In the same spirit that Ellen White said, how are you going to reach the world with the three angels' message? In the Rise of the Adventist publishing work, we documented that in the Storehouse history. Multiple publishing houses. And the bigger one in the US serves as a mother to help set up the other ones in other countries. So the history, the documentation was all there. Why aren't we following it? It's unbelief. And the key is they want to rule and control. But the logistics of it, okay, things have changed. And so the idea of, well, okay, say a country needs, if you want to provide Vanuatu with 15,000 pieces of literature so that everybody has their own complete set, how are you going to get all that literature over there? You know, if you're going to do it by mailbag used to be the way, it's a 70-pound bag. It'd take 3 months and it might get there. But now the mailbag used to be cost effective, but no more. And I found out, we knew the secretary back in Mountaindale, they were shipping boxes of literature. And the weight limit was 70 pounds. So I don't know how many tracks you can get in there, a few hundred. They were sending them over to African countries at the cost of like $1,200 priority rate shipping. And I'm like, okay, start adding the cost per track then. And this is 15 years ago. After COVID, shipping literature, I mean, a few pieces is one thing, but I'll just give you an example. To ship 5 pieces of literature just within the US, not a big deal. You got media mail, but you cross the border into Canada or in Mexico, 5 tracks cost, like $6. So there's over $1 per track just to ship it. So the cost per track goes out the roof. So one of the argument is, well, it costs more to do digital printing. Yes, it does, on the order of 50 to 75 cents a track, versus offset printing. It might be 30 cents a track, or depends on, but you add in, how are you going to get that stuff where it needs to be? So the idea that they can supply the world field from one place in the US is ridiculous. It's ludicrous. It's impossible. And so this is a major issue. And that's why the flock is starved. The field is deprived. And I'm like, this is a criminal act. You should use those resources to set up publishing. And, I'll just throw the numbers out. We know this because we've done it multiple times. The approximate cost to set up a digital publishing house, even, people say, oh, in your own home. Yeah, if that's all you have, you can do it in your home. You can start there, on the order of $2,500. That's the stipend for 2 Bible workers in 1 month at Mountaindale. I think they're paying them $1,800 a month for the stipend of a Bible worker that just entertains the flock, a hireling, basically. They don't like when I talk this way, but it's true. We can set up a publishing house. And furthermore, we'll let you get more into that about how we operate. But we don't have those expenses with these full-time Bible workers. So we use that first tithe to set up publishing houses.
Yes, thank you, Brother Eric. Actually, yes, my next question is about the organization model. Does UPA7 have a executive council, a vice president, president, a committee? How do you operate?
Answer to most all of it is no, because we've been challenged. Who's your president? We don't have one. Who's your leader? Jesus. They seem mystified because this whole idea, well, like when the group in Mountaindale split in 2005, I was in the middle of that. I was on the phone conversation with the group that split from Mountaindale, their attempts to reorganize. And the first thing they're worried about is, well, we got to collect tithe and we got to set up a location and some kind of executive council. That's the first thing they're worried about. Hint, hint, that's what happened when the recent pre-11th hour split from Mountaindale, last September. They're worried about, we got to start collecting tithes so we can pay these hireling Bible workers that used to be in Mountaindale. I said, well, who appointed you? So they're diverting all their resources to Bible workers, and they neglect the publishing. They haven't solved that problem. But we're like, no, you don't need that. And they're perplexed. They scratch their head. Well, how can you operate without an executive council? or a GADSDA. So they never sat back and analyzed the question. Okay, in Brother Haddo's day, there was a association, General Association Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and there was an executive council. Okay, why did that come about? When did it come about? And where are the instructions to continue it after he died? They don't ask those kind of questions. We decided to ask those questions and look at the history. Once again, history teaches us. So when you look at the Shepherd's Rod, it began with Universal Publishing, 1930. Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, Volume 2, in Los Angeles, California, and then tracks numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, up until 1934. And then they relocated, they moved to Texas in 1935. What did they have? Universal Publishing. That was the foundation. Later, they had the Shepherd's Rod Association. Okay, so as they started to grow, they started to grow in organizational structure.
Mm.
But this whole idea of GADSDA, when did that come about? That didn't arise until 1943. That's a fact. Okay, Leviticus was published in. And then the question is, why did it arise? People don't think, there was no GADSDA for the first 13 years of the Shepherd's Rod, but they published like crazy. By 1944, they published tracks 1 through 15, answer books 1 to 4, and they hadn't got into the TGs yet. Those started in 46, but they had the old codes. So they had a good portion of the rod was published at that time. So GADSDA, for people that don't know, was organized out of necessity to support the non-conscription status of Davidian young men that were going to be drafted into the World War II. And because of the failure of the General Conference to support their non-combatant status as Seventh-day Adventists, Brother Haddow had to organize so he could present to the government an organized ministerial association with the supporting documents, which you can read in Military Stand, of why we could only accept the non-combatant status, and you have to accommodate our Sabbath belief and our vegetarian diet. If you meet those standards, we'll participate. And of course, so they were giving what is called a CO status, conscientious objector. So that's why the GADSDA was established. And then the Executive Council, of course, they don't analyze how was that first appointed, and they didn't vote and nominate. Brother Haddow was the president because God chose him as a Porter Prophet president, and he selected his Executive Council. That's a fact. So after he dies, that brings up the essential question: well, who authorized to continue GADSDA? You don't find instructions from the rod. You don't find it in a will from Brother Haddow. And the answer is all as students of history, that Florence Haddow usurped and took over and appointed herself and destroyed the office of president. Oh, the president's dead now. Now we got to have a vice president. So she nominated herself, and the remainder of the council approved her. And so she and her brother got in. And so they're the ones that rearranged this whole government model. And the irony is that's what Mountaindale and Waco follow, and Salem. I'm like, it's all unauthorized. And we've gone into details explaining that. So if that's true, then how can we, brings back to the question, how can we operate today without you being a usurper, appointing yourself? Because the other side of the coin was, well, groups have organized and said, well, we got a president, hint, hint, Bashan. We got a Porter president. Brother Hadow's the last prophet, yes, but we got a president now. Who appointed him? But now that we got a president, we have an executive council. Oh, we're the lawful association. That's Bashan's argument. We reorganized in 61. Well, yeah, Bingham was part of it, but there's Brother Warden. And they never tell you the rest of the story. What happened in 62? They don't want to tell you that. There was a split. So Bashan and Bingham go off with their thing, but they solved the problem of we got the association, we got the bylaws, we got a president. And in some sense, they are closer to the Leviticus than Waco, Mountaindale. But it still begs the question, who appointed their president? Hint, hint, he appointed himself. So And then you've got later comers like Lennox Sam, who appointed himself as president and prophet and everything. So he has no problem with the association because he's king, right? He thinks he's, people think he's antitypical King David. He's not. He's a rank imposter. So these are attempts of people to try to figure out how to do things, but they end up, exalting an unauthorized executive council or some porter or president or king or prophet or whatever. So amidst all of this maze of confusion, the question is, well, how is it that we can really operate? And the answer is really simple. It's called the hands of Zerubbabel, Elijah's helpers. Yes, Brother Houteff is dead. He's resting in the grave. But the shepherd's rod message is not dead. It's alive and well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So what can we do? And you go back to that 61 reorganization. There's the answer. Reestablish publishing the original literature, and then train Bible workers, self-sacrificing Bible workers, not hirelings, to go out and to share the message, and then to train and teach people how to become fully equipped Bible workers. And we always argue, my wife came up with this, we're candidates for the 144,000. We're all striving. None of us can say that we have arrived. But if we're going to assume a role in the kingdom as evangelists, one of the 144,000, then we better be getting ready for it, right? Learning the message, learning the history, and that's all part and parcel of this package. And so the way we operate is we organize locally. And so it can start with an individual. If you're in a country and you love the shepherd's rod and you want to see it published, we'll share the example of, now not so secret, but Sister Marlene, who came out of nowhere, right? But contacted us, who is determined. Nobody could stop this woman. Thank God for determined people. But she loves the rod. She wants to do it. So a one-woman operation, but when she saw what we had, we said, we will help you. Here's the stuff. She didn't ask permission. She got all the equipment. And then you, Brother Mikhail, took up the calls. I didn't train you. And so this is part of the secret. I went to Africa and I trained about 5 brethren, Brother Stanley being one of them, Brother Lindell, in Zimbabwe. I didn't train anybody in South Africa. I trained them. But once I came back to the US, I don't have to, jump on the airplane and, fly back and forth. That's what the hirelings do. Somebody, there's somebody here, and they're treated like kings. They jump on the airplane, all expenses paid, and then they get to the country and they're treated like kings. But we don't need to do that. We can save all that money and divert it to setting up publishing houses. So once Brother Stanley was trained, he goes back down to South Africa, and we worked it out, and he set up the publishing there. I didn't have to go over there. So the training is the hands-on, the dedication, the particulars, because this is God's work. So the proper setup, the technical details, the spiritual aspect, laying your hands on God's work is not a trivial thing. I mean, remember the example of, Phineas, who put his hand on the ark. We got to be careful here. This is God's work. It's holy ground. So you can't put an unconsecrated element in there. So Brother Stanley, once everything got lined up, sets it up in Africa. And then you come into the picture later, and who trained you? Not me, Brother Stanley. So hands, training, and then you now had that great privilege of going to the next venues where you had experience and contact, Australia and UK. And now those brethren, the Brother Ray in UK, could be an instrument to go into the next field, and we're working on it right now. So this is the secret. It's, to them, it's mysterious, but it's self-supporting, self-sacrificing Bible workers. We help each other. So it can start with an individual, and then as it grows, 2 or 3 come in. Then you can start with the nucleus, just like the Adventist Church started with a handful of teenagers and the nucleus of 3 people: James White, Ellen White, and Joseph Bates. Study the history. So we're not making this stuff up. We're operating on historical precedent. How does God raise up and organize a church? Read A.T. Jones about church organization. See, most people are uneducated. They're uninformed. You know, they're not, they don't understand things. We strive to, and we strive to share all of that because we want to be the best in the sight of God, organized, educated, and know all of these angles. So yeah, there is a way. So, and we got a whole video on the Hands of Zerubbabel, Elijah's helpers, how this works, but it's a small localized. And then as it grows, on the other end, for example, Vanuatu, with 300 brethren, they had the whole means to set up a publishing committee. And that's a description of what it is. If you're going to get together and plan the publication and what to do with it, then you need some kind of organizing committee, and call it what it is, a publishing committee. And then from there, there's no limit. Well, what about a school? No problem. If you got the need, set one up. There was a brother sister there that had set up a school for children, because with that many brethren, there's children. I said, well, what should we do? They had it under Mountdale. Continue on what you're already doing.
Yeah.
You know, and if somebody says, well, what about a rest home for the old people? If you have a need, then set one up. Well, what about a chapel to organize meetings? Well, go for it. And I know what's happening in South Africa. You're in the middle of it. You didn't ask permission. I know, Brother McKay, you didn't call me up. Oh, Brother Eric, you didn't ask for authorization from some man-appointed authority. No, you just went for it. And then I found out, I'm like, wow, praise the Lord, go for it. Can we help? You see? So it's decentralized, but trusting that the Holy Spirit will raise up bodies of people to become light-making, and you'll know who they are. When I first saw Brother Andeli, when said, we're going to train how to do publishing work, and whoever shows up, and this young man shows up with a big smile on his face, and I said to Brother Stanley, who's he? Oh, this Brother Andeli. He's young, he's zealous, he's on fire. And I'm like, big smile on his face, and I said, so you want to learn this? Oh yeah. And look where he is now. He's producing videos. It's like, so you'll know them. God will put them there. They won't come in arguing and all this. They'll just say, hey, I want to have a part of this. And I'll say, okay. So, yeah, it is it's remarkable.
Truly amazing. Truly amazing, Brother Eric. There was a social media post some time ago, a couple of weeks ago, and somebody posted that, upa7 is just made up of crumbs. What do you have to say on that, Brother Eric? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I like a little humor. We're feeding off the crumbs. Well, you know, the Bible has a story about the woman, the Gentile, came to Jesus, and he pushed her away. And she says, well, even the dogs feed off the crumbs of their servant's table. And Jesus is like, remarkable. She wasn't deterred. Really, it was an insult in a way, but she didn't take it personally. And so neither do we. It is interesting that particular comment, it comes from a person who's antagonistic, that doesn't like what we're doing. They're threatened by it, but they support Bashan. They think, oh, Bashan, we're the original, we're the association, we've got everything, so we're feeding off the crumbs of Bashan. I'm like, sorry, we might be feeding off crumbs, but not from their table. We're feeding off of crumbs from the table of the original shepherd tribe, and we're happy to accept them and take them and grind them into flour and make new bread, or find a seed and then plant it and eat, and then make bread from scratch. Make loaves. So as long as it's a good seed, and we know we've got the good seed because we've located it. They all know this. We found the good seed, and we're replicating it. The track literature.
Amazing. Brother Eric, final question. Where is UPA7 going?
Worldwide, because that's what the rod says. It's got to, its purpose and mission was to a call for revival and reformation, to gather the 144,000, the first fruits, out of Laodicea. Right now, it's upwards of 22 million. So somewhere out of this scattered, dysphoria of Seventh-day Adventism, there's going to emerge 144,000. We don't know who they are or where they're from. Just like Elijah said, well, he thinks he's the only one, right? It was the one-man operation, right? But God says, oh, no. There 7,000 have bowed their knees to Baal. So how are we going to reach them? We know that they're going to be reached as the statement from Spirit Prophecy. Many, Ellen White said, many will trace their first convictions to the reading of our publications. Because the harvest is ripe and the laborers are few, which they truly are. Most of them are hirelings, right? Want to be full-time paid Bible workers. By the way, we're not. At times we have used tithe. Like when I travel to Africa, I use first tithe as evangelists, and we make sure that individuals that are qualified to accept first tithe are indeed qualified up to the highest standard, which is certificate of fellowship and appropriate knowledge and training. So we thoroughly vet and screen so that we're not sending out amateurs or novices. And we have brethren in Africa that have you were paid with tithes to do your evangelistic work in Australia, but not permanently. I mean, we still, myself, work on the side and contribute to tithe, and that is necessary for special purposes. We use that, but as far as where this is going, this is truly a layman's movement, self-sacrificing. And so to reach these 22 million Adventists, it's obvious that you need to set up not one publishing house in the U.S. and try to get this literature over, but multiple. And our goal is a publishing house wherever Seventh-day Adventists are located. And we know that according to the GC archives, that there are Adventists in every country in the world. So that's what we're after. We've entered into the great continent of Australia, long been neglected. There's been a Davidian presence there in the past, but nothing organized. And it's been, never heard of Bashan or anybody. They tend to focus on places like, Philippines, or countries in Africa, hint, where the money is, so they can go harvest money out of it, or Thailand or Indonesia. So they'll have footholds in places. But as far as getting literature into enough literature for all those places, no, they're not capable. So our goal is to get publishing set up in every country in the world, and even multiple in some areas, like a country in the Caribbean. There's a lot of Adventists in the Inter-American division. That's Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, all of those places. Our goal is to see a publishing house in every one of those countries. We're praying and hoping to break into Jamaica, and we got a representative there, and we're praying for that. But that's ultimately our goal. And this is going to be a layman's movement. It's not going to be headed by Brother Eric or whatever. You're going to do your thing. South Africa is a key hub for the whole African continent. Not only do you provide tract literature, but you're the first to provide the Shepherd's Rod Volume 1 and 2 in the African continent, or in the original charts. So as you grow and expand, you can be of service to other countries, neighboring countries. What about Nigeria? What about Botswana? What about Mozambique? What about Kenya? All of those, every one of them needs a publishing house. So our call and appeal to you Davidians, whether you're in the U.S. or your home country is in, how about South America or Latin America, anywhere, why don't you come and talk to us? Let us help you set up publishing. Break free from all this corruption. Why are you sending your tithes to feed greedy dogs? You got to stop. God will hold you accountable. We have people that are, supporting this with their own means, and they are instrumental in setting up publishing houses. They're not known by other people, but it's just simple individuals. So yes, you can have an impact, but you don't need to be ruled by an unauthorized group of people. And anybody that's been to a session at Mount Del Waco knows it's pure theater. It's pure politics. It's highly corrupted. So break free. Most of us, we come from all the different groups. It doesn't matter. God's allowed us. And it doesn't matter if you're brand new in the message. But we don't look at the past. We're looking at, let's advance this thing to the kingdom. And that's our goal. So to reach 70 Adventists worldwide, if we don't have the answer, then show us a better way.
Well, yes, indeed, Brother Eric. Thank you so much for the history of UPA7. What an amazing, amazing history, how the Lord has led yourself and your wife to you heard the call, and now UPA7 is well established in many continents and well on its way to getting multiple storehouses. We really truly thank the Lord for his leading here, and may he continue to help UPA7 to establish itself worldwide, as you said.
We thank God for this opportunity. And here's the key, to the success is trusting in God, that even as a person, that if you put your foot in the River Jordan, God can open doors that no man can shut it. And the vision, without a vision, the people perish. So it might appear as a mountain of impossibility, but Jesus said, if you have faith, you'll be able to move mountains. And this is what we're talking about. This is real, live. It's happening.
Yeah.
We're moving the mountains of impossibility. And whether I live or die, I thank God for this opportunity, because should I go off the scene of action, upa7 is not going anywhere. It's going to do its intended purpose, because this is God ordained. This is not a man-made operation. Okay. This is a God mandated. We just claim the information and the concepts that are already in the Spirit, Prophecy, and the Rod, and doing our part to make it happen. And now many, many people, our hands have joined in, and this work will succeed, whether any of us come or go.
Yeah.
The concept is true. The idea is real. And God will always have people to bring it all the way to Palestine. So we thank God for that opportunity and privilege. Thank you, Brother Mikhail, for opportunity to share this with you all. And whoever hears this, like I say, get a hold of us, any of us. That's our goal, is to help you to do this work and trust God. He can use you. He wants to use you. So we're making an appeal to all those brethren that might be wondering what to do. Well, the door's open. Don't shut it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brother Eric. Thank you very much. And to our viewers, you heard the appeal and the call. Come and speak to us. The Lord wants to use you to open up multiple publishing houses around the world. So thank you very much, and may you be blessed and stay blessed. Amen.
Godspeed. God bless you all.
Bye.